I was trying to figure out how to cook biodegradable plastics in the kitchen. And so what I will show today really is work that I produced for an exhibition that's up right now at Topps Gallery in Memphis. So it's brand new work, and I hope that my images are better than my words. One of the things about projects is that you're too busy working on them to intelligently talk about them, and much less theorize your own work. So I will talk a little bit about where my research comes from, how it's situated as creative practice, and what really brought me to biodegradable plastics. So to begin with, I'm an architect working in the realm of the interior, and my research really focuses on ways in which the surface is articulated within the contemporary interior. And what that means is really looking at the relationship, or novel relationships really, between patterns that organize surface geometries, methods of fabrication and assembly, materials, and inevitably experience. And one of the things about creative practice as research is that it's really impossible to isolate kind of individual parts, because creative practice, at least in my mind, is about investigating relationships through design. And so if I were to isolate, let's say, computational patterns, I would find myself in perhaps a different discipline. And I could say the same thing with materials. So if I were really only looking at biodegradable materials, I would end up being a material scientist or a chemist, which I'm certainly not. But I did somehow arrive at plastics. And so in the movie Graduate, we all know that I have one word for you, and it's plastics, because the future is in plastics, according to Mr. McGuire. So that was in 1967. Nearly half a century later, you could say that the future is in bioplastics. So just very quickly, I just want to define what bioplastics are, just so that we know what we're talking about. These are just really, really simple definitions. Bioplastics are biodegradable plastics whose components are derived from renewable raw materials. They're biodegradable because they can be broken down by microorganisms, from complex molecules to simple molecules. And they're plastics because they're still essentially made up of polymers. They just happen to be biopolymers. And so in my research, I looked at bioplastic as really a kind of a series of recipes, and I'll talk a little bit about how I've tapped into kind of the DIY making culture through bioplastics. But it's really a simple recipe. It's some sort of biopolymer, and that can be anything from a carbohydrate or a protein or a gelatin. A plasticizer, meaning that it's something that relaxes the molecules so that the material can actually decay like plastic. And then there could be other additives. Just like any other liquid material, you could, let's say, transform its primary qualities by color, texture, and so on. And so even though biodegradable materials seem very now, so plastics were the 20th century, we could say that bioplastics could be the 21st century. They're actually not new materials. So most of the things that, most of the recipes and methods that I've come across in my research are really quite old. Many of them from the 18th and 19th century. Of course, celluloid with an invention or a discovery in the 19th century is a kind of bioplastic, and even right before World War II, Henry Ford produced a bioplastic automobile prototype. So none of these things are really new, but what I'm interested in is how some of these things that already exist in terms of recipes and methods intersect with, let's say, conditions that we're dealing with now, for example, digital fabrication. So because I'm not much of a scientist, I can tell you that most of the kind of foundational things about do-it-yourself biodegradable plastics and how that research kind of leads to more sophisticated, let's say, avenues of research are actually covered in Eugene Stevens' book on green plastics. And it's actually quite good because it explains the science of the materials, but actually allows you to experiment with some of these things yourself. And that was really important to me, was to look at materials that are not only available industrially, but also that could be prototyped in my studio. And so in the same way that digital fabrication has been quite compelling to those of us that were kind of born into that generation of makers, what's compelling about digital fabrication and digital media is that you can produce things from scratch, right? At least in terms of form, in terms of pattern. My generation has spent a lot of time thinking about customization, resisting, let's say, mass production, and trying to find new ways to make things from scratch. And so this idea of making your own materials from scratch is actually quite compelling, because it means that this kind of making from scratch isn't just a matter of form, but also a matter of material. So actually, I'm not such a do-gooder that my research would have started with bioplastics because I'm so interested in sustainability. It was really more that I was interested in how to make materials from scratch. And so this was actually the beginning of the research that has, and the prototypes that have led me to bioplastics. About 4 years ago, I was kind of struggling with the really both need and desire to produce textiles that weren't woven, that weren't felted, but that you could somehow cast yourself. And so I was working with shallow relief formwork and then casting urethane rubber to really produce not a flexible and customizable sheet material that had both the qualities of let's say, a kind of sheet, but also had depth in terms of relief. And through incremental making, I was actually able to move from making something that's this big to making something that's 8 feet long, or however long the CNC routed formwork could be. So these are sheets of 4x8 MDF that were CNC routed, and so the size of the custom material that's then here is applied in tension over a frame. But you can really get it to be anything. So this was a project from December of 2011, installation in New Orleans, a part of the decor competition that some of you have seen already. And this, like the project that I'll show, is really this kind of exercise in trying to push how far can we take this idea of making everything from scratch and making everything ourselves. Now, one of the byproducts of that was that I was casting these urethane panels in my house because it was the only place that was actually dust free enough to cast liquid material in 4x8 sheets. and it was getting pretty toxic. So I actually checked myself into Hotel San Jose for a few days because I have a friend that works for Liz Lambert, and so I was able to get a really good rate for a few days, and they felt very sorry for me. But it meant that I was like super excited to figure a lot of this stuff out, but that this just really wasn't how I wanted to work. And so this idea of research is interesting when you're figuring stuff out in terms of digital fabrication. It's really exciting, but you're actually pushing this agenda that promotes something very toxic. And so that was kind of the dilemma, how to proceed with this way of making. And so after a while, and after some research, I started making my own plastic, which is really the mixture of gelatin, which is the polymer, along with some starch, glycerol, which is the plasticizer, which relaxes the molecules. And I actually used some of the same formwork from the previously toxic project to start casting some of these test pieces. And it took a while to figure out a range of recipes and a range of properties that this made from scratch material had. What I learned by working with samples that are, let's say, 12 by 12, something similar to that, maybe like 8 by 12, 8 by 14, was that it was possible to control the flexibility and the rigidity. The material was really quite clear, which was beautiful, and that could actually be, if you didn't want it to be clear, then you could add things to it to make it translucent, which was also very good. And you kind of see how you start getting different effects based on how the material shrinks as it cures and the formwork. And so I thought, okay, well, I figured this out, so now I can make an 8-foot tall piece. It will be super easy. And we have a month to do it. So this was the site for the installation, which is a really crazy, literally hole in the wall, which has become a gallery in downtown Memphis. And this is the form that I generated that was meant to be fabricated from bioplastic. The idea, so it's really, I was after some of the same effects that we explored in the bioluminescent piece in New Orleans. But because I wasn't working with the same collaborator who actually made the beautiful steel frame in the previous project, and the material was maybe a little bit less certain, and decided that the form would really be kind of a pendulum suspended from 3 points in the ceiling. There would be a steel armature in the center, and then the piece wouldn't touch the floor. And it seemed pretty straightforward that these things would be in tension, and that it would just kind of make itself. These are the templates for the panels for CNC routing. And then the formwork, perversely enough, was made from petroleum-based plastic. So the idea or the narrative for the show was really that the exhibition stage is this kind of encounter between bio and petroplastic. And so the bioplastic, which is the kind of the custom fitted piece, could be biodegraded. We actually have the show is up through March 29th, and the piece will be composted in a community garden in Memphis. But the formwork is actually the addition that you get to collect. So it kind of made sense to have a material that can't ever go away be the thing that you have to keep forever. So this was the CNC routing of the material. This was 40 pounds of Knox gelatin, which Chris Marson had questions about when it arrived in the office. And then it was really about, I mean, this is what my research looks like. It doesn't take place in a lab and nor an archive. It's over a pot that's slowly being heated to 209 degrees. I was able to make 3-gallon batches at one time. There were 12 pieces to be cast. Some of them had to be recast. So about 16 3-gallon batches were made. This was the formwork, and this is actually formwork with the bioplastic that's already poured into it. So you see that it's pretty clear, and it's really just gets the kind of the yellow tint that you'll see in a moment through as it gets thicker. For students that are making things and prototyping, there is a difference between the scale of a sample and the scale of some other scale. And this isn't just a matter of what it looks like or how strong it is, but just everything about it. Like so what you learn when you make plastic from scratch is that if a piece is bigger and thicker, then it starts molding at a certain point if you don't treat it a certain way, which is something that would have never happened with an 8x10 piece because it just cures really quickly. And so, again, it's this kind of benefit of working at full scale and prototyping at full scale because you get to figure stuff out. You also get to discover qualities that weren't so apparent at another scale. And so I remember, like, originally when I came up with the form for the piece, I remember texting Clay Odom and Corey and asking them if it was too boring. But actually, the material helped make it less boring because it was producing, because of the kind of geometries in the pattern, it started producing all of these ripples that really helped. So this is what my place looked like for a while, but this time completely non-toxic. So, and this is what the plastic looks like when it's being released from the formwork. You see how clear it is. And then this is the show. So this is the hole in the wall. So the idea was to, again, to install both the formwork and the piece. This is the piece. And so I guess one of the things about creative practice and research through making and making sure that the work is disseminated not just through academia, but that it actually interfaces with the public, is actually being able to, let's say, stage certain kinds of experiences that people wouldn't otherwise have. So it seems kind of simple, but there are so many people at the show that couldn't quite, or it's like if you tell people that you're cooking plastic at home, they think that you're going to die from cancer, even if you tell them that it's bioplastic. So it's really interesting to kind of think about what the relationship is between the public and the materials. So, yeah, so you see the essentially there was a kind of a steel pyramid-shaped wireframe, which is the armature in the center. And then it took about 3 days to get the tension cables to be just right, because of course it's like a marionette. And I had to figure it out myself, so I didn't want any help. And then the other thing about it, of course, is that the cables that are in tension are also determining the geometry of the, or it has to, the cables in tension have to match the geometry of the panels, because those were already fixed. So the material is pretty transparent, but when you layer it, it actually produces a kind of opacity. So one of the things about this research is that we encounter biodegradable plastics in the most banal situations, like at Whole Foods when we get plastic utensils, or maybe at a coffee shop where you get a plastic cup. But what's really interesting is to think about what the design implications might be at another scale, or spatially, or in terms of experience and not just utility. Like I said, I'm still kind of processing all of this and figuring out what to do with it. If you want to know a little bit more, there is an article in this month's issue of Texas Architect, and also last week there was a piece in Art Forum, and there maybe a little more in those two things. Thank you.
My name is Chiara Consiglieri. I'm an MR2 in Sustainable Design, and this is the research that I'm conducting for my independent study this semester, which is going to be the basis for my MDS in the next fall. The subject of this research is energy retrofits, and by that I mean retrofits that aim at improving the energetic performance and comfort of a building specifically. And I'm really focusing on single-family homes in Austin. I've been working on two case studies, one from Old West Austin and the other one from East Austin, so I'm kind of interested in looking how different typologies and different ages. But so it's specifically on single-family homes. So what I'm really interested in looking is, of course, my bias is, I think it's energy retrofit in homes, it's important, so I start from this point of view. But what I'm trying to look at is, how can we if there is a business model or social organization can deliver this home retrofits in a way that's holistic, more enduring and effective, while meeting also the interests of the homeowners and the professionals in the remodeling sector. So really I'm trying to look at the frustrations and the pains that people experience when they decide they want to undertake a remodeling, energy retrofit in their house, and really trying to understand what role these pains, these frustrations play. Also I'm looking at what are the actors that are involved in this process and how they really shape the process. And also I'm interested in looking what's the way these necessities of the homes or the homeowners are evaluated, how does that happen currently in Austin? So, this is a very complex thing, and there could be many, many reasons why people are kind of doubting about going for a retrofit. I didn't want to dig into that, but mainly what I want to do is kind of try to offer maybe suggestions to improve this current process, but from kind of the supply side. So finding a way maybe that we can offer this process in a different way, just to make it easier and more accessible to people, to homeowners, and in a way that it's more effective. Two things that I think are really important are offering a higher degrees of coordination to people that are not experts, so don't really know. And also kind of trying to guarantee a higher level of quality. And also I think it's important to think about audits in a different way. That it's not just technological, but it's also social in a way, so it really takes into account personal needs of every household. So the way I'm structuring the research, I'm using some literature on sustainability, after network theories, energy simulation strategies, using a good amount of data on energy consumption, the housing stock, and the remodeling industry. But a good part of it is based on interviews. I've been conducting some to homeowners, contractors and builders, designers. I still didn't get anyone from Austin Energy, but I'm working on that. So that's an important part of it. So the way I'm going to present it to you, you're going to have a little definition on retrofit, a lot of data, so don't get bored. It's not that many pretty pictures, but I'll be fast. And some findings and some of the first findings, and I'll present the 2 case studies briefly. So really, when we talk about retrofit, we really mean an upgrade of an existing building or an object, but with a technology that wasn't existing at the time when this building was built. Those are definitions that I've taken from the Oxford English Dictionary. I kind of added my own one, where I define it as a comprehensive socio-technological strategy for engaging a continuous regeneration of the built environment. What I kind of like it better specifically for buildings is that it makes more sense to me thinking about retrofit really as a socio-technological strategy, because when you put a new technology in a house and the users don't engage with it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And also, I like to think about a retrofit like not something that's not static, but it's actually continuous. So I think those 2 points are important. So the terms was originated in the 40s and the 50s from the combination of retroactive and fit. It's sometimes it's kind of confused with other terms like refurbishment, refit, renovation. I don't want to dig into the nuances, and I think each of them slightly means something different. What I think it's interesting, it's kind of going through the literature and see how the meaning of thinking about retrofitting a house has kind of changed. So I would say as a first instance, when you would say in the 40s and the 50s, a retrofit was more about beautification, adding rooms, changing the style of a house. Then with the oil crisis in the 70s, more people started looking into energy savings. But I think it's really in the last couple of decades where retrofit was really taking more of a sense in terms of sustainability. And right now, I think it's also gaining momentum in a way that's comprehensive, and so it's not about electricity anymore, but it's about water and all the other systems, CO2 emissions, materials, landscaping. So when we talk about that, it's a lot of stuff. So I'm going to present you a bunch of data. I'm going to go fast. This is just to show you how bad the states are, something that you already know, and I kind of compare with other countries just to show you we consume 95 quadrillion in Japan, that's very dense, this consumes 22. Italy is an average of Europe on 8 quadrillions. Texas consumes about 12% of the United States total. I couldn't find a lot of specific data on Austin. I'm still working on that, I'm sorry. All I found was megawatt, which is, so everything you're seeing in terms of general consumption is in BTUs, and the electricity specifically it's in kilowatt hours. So I kind of found some information from Austin Energy about their total consumption of electricity per year. But what we can see from this data is that the consumption didn't really change. So the upper chart is kind of showing that the consumption in the household, it's being constant. It seems like it's kind of it'll go up, but it will certainly not go down. And prices are also supposed to continue rising. What is interesting in looking at 1993 and 2010, there is a total in 1993, which is 10.1 quadrillion, and in 2010 it's 10.18. So there's not a very big difference. Of course, new homes are better, but also we have more appliances. So it's interesting to look at how we're using different energy in the house. So there is less of space heating, but we're using more for appliances and slightly more for air conditioning. And these are uses by full. So you see that most of the things in the house run on electricity, but space heating and some of the cooling that go on natural gas. Just kind of zooming in into the Texas situation, this is graphs that I've taken from the Census Bureau. So they kind of compare the US with the WSC, is the West South Central, which is the area where the census places Texas. So Texas it's slightly lower on like general consumption. It's like 13% lower than the US average, but actually the expenditures are higher. And in terms of electricity, it's kind of similar to like the West South Central states, but it's higher than the national average. So the electricity consumption is like 26% higher than the national average. This is some sort of thing that I wanted to play with, just looking at price of electricity and like comparing some states. So I've taken New York, which is like really expensive. They pay like 17.6 like cents per kilowatt hours. Louisiana, that's very cheap, is like 8 cents. And Texas, which is kind of in the middle, which is like 10 cents. And like their bills are kind of similar, Louisiana and New York, where like Texas is even higher. And like the consumption, as you can see, is like double of New York with not that many more like customers. So of course the point I'm making is we waste a lot of energy in our homes. Yeah. So going to the housing types, like about 60-70% we have single family homes, so that's really the bulk of the problem. Some apartments and really few mobile homes. Texas seems to have a slightly younger house stock than the national average. There is not many buildings built before the 50s. And this is just a graphic. It's kind of showing like the way the buildings went up. So the square footage was almost double. The consumption went up. And like the size of the household was actually the only thing that went down. So from the 50s we had like 3.3 people in a household, and now it's like 2.5. So less people, bigger houses, more consumption. And this is just showing what's going on with like the new units that are completed. So Texas is actually, and the southern states are doing better than the national. So they're still like growing more than others, but actually the amount of new units that are built is not that big. So again, my point is we should take care of what we got already. And the vacancy rate from the statistics, it's increasing as well. Regarding the remodeling industry, so 80% of the houses that are remodeled are owner occupied, and that makes sense because people tend to fix something that they own or where they think they can live longer, and just like 20% is rental units. Most of the remodelings are done, like 3/4 are on improvements, like replacement, upgrades, or other things that will increase the value of the house, and like 1/3 generally goes to kind of like maintenance and other things to preserve the quality. This is kind of showing like very intuitive data that newer homes consume less energy than older ones, but what is interesting is in the graph at the bottom, we have different like years of survey. It's kind of showing that the houses that were built before have a higher potential for retrofit, so offer like more opportunity for energy retrofits. And these are like few data regarding like the remodeling industry, which I think it's part of the problem, is that it's an industry that's very fragmented. So like 2/3 of these home remodels are self-employed. It's an industry that, compared with other housing-related industry, doesn't generate a lot of revenue. So home builders and building materials and supply dealers generate way more money. So it is also the kind of business that tends to like have a lot of downturns. And part of it is because it's also people that are very specialized. So everyone just specializes in small, in different trades. Although I would say that now, like in the recent year with the federal local tax credits, like there is more of an incentive also to kind of invigorate this industry through the energy efficiency remodelings. So moving to the interviews and like the things, I've identified some social relevant groups, which are homeowners, contractors and builders, designers, remodeling companies, regulators, which I mean like Austin, City of Austin, Energy Austin, and more. And I've just started trying to connect all of them and see in a way like how they shape the process, who is influenced by who, and kind of like how, like which are a strong relationship and which are like weaker relationships. So I'm still developing that. So now I'm gonna show you some, I've tried to code some of the interviews, kind of like making some bullet points of what like came out of it. So contractors and builders, of course, don't like the permits, don't like going through inspections and inspectors. But the thing is because some of them really like the code to be tight. This is not because they're against it. A lot of complaints about being a very time-consuming process, and they complain that in a city so like technological, like Austin, something like that is not computerized. It's not. They don't have an informatic system for that, and there's a lot of different inspectors inspecting a building, the same building, and so sometimes they're kind of questioning what's also like quality of that inspection as well. And of course, the code seems too often. Regarding the expenditures, this category really has it's really tied to the qualified and specialized labor. So when I ask, like, do you recycle the material on site? You're like, well, I could, but it's too time consuming. So for me, it's better to buy new wood. So for them, really, time and specialized labor is fundamental, it's crucial. And designers, most of the times, are not involved in their project, unless it's really like a big layout change. But like I haven't seen designers really involved in the process with a lot of contractors and builders, and they tend to prepare the blueprints and just do the drawings on their own. And about the homeowners, well, their idea is that a lot of people ask for green buildings, although they don't really know what they mean, and sometimes it's more like they do it more for a status symbol rather than like engaging it with a building. What I get from designers and architects is a lot of frustration because they get to do projects where they have great ideas of like high energy like features, but then those are the ones that got the less priority. So sometimes when they have to balance with like new cabinets and like I don't know, another type of system, people go with the new cabinets. And there is a problem with homeowners where it's kind of like sort of catch-22, where like wealthy homeowners don't really care about saving $5,000 a year, whether others that have a more modest income cannot really afford the upfront costs. So there's always that kind of dilemma. So regarding the homeowners, most of the frustrations came from dealing with disruption, with construction works, with contractors and subcontractors that were not competent or they were not really doing the job well. And I can guarantee that most of the people would pay a little more just to have someone that's coordinating. So it's not them being the contractors. So, and the ones I interviewed actually found having a designer or someone helping them like a valuable expertise. And what happens also is sometimes it's hard for people to bid on a retrofit project, so people often get like extra charges that they didn't expect. And so that's part of the frustration too, because people kind of down-estimate the jobs they have to do. These are the two case studies where I started working on. The one on the left is a house in East Austin, and this one on the right, it's in Old West Austin. They're like different projects because the one on the right was actually, I would say, is more of a new project than really a retrofit because no one lived there before the retrofit, whether the other one was habited and the owner just decided to go with this intervention. I like the idea, the fact that they're so different because they really show two different approaches to this topic of retrofit. So they both have 5-star rating with the Austin Energy Green Building Program, but they're really different in their core. They both did renovation and addition. And one, the family hired an architect. In the other one, the owner himself did all the work because he had an MR background, so he kind of knew, I guess, a good deal about it. They both went on like adding a bunch of different energy efficiency features. So they had like PV systems, wall insulation, sealed attic, new system for the HVAC, ductworks. Of course, like this guy did more of an intense work just because like generally people don't do exterior insulation because it's a very invasive, and like this person decided to really push it and did a lot of it. This one is more like there is a new part which didn't involve so much like disruption of the existing because they just built it from scratch. So let's say they still perform better like respect to like old buildings, or like they're good in that sense, but that one has a different work behind it. So what I like found out comparing them, it's like this two homeowners really had the goal to go green. They really wanted it. They got this 5-star rating, so they went through the process of rating. They really wanted to have the best they could with their budgets. And also for them, it was important to kind of relate to their neighborhood and like show like kind of show like their status and like it's the right thing to do and like it's good also to show this to my neighborhoods. But what I thought it was really stunning is really the two lifestyles that were associated with these two projects. Because one house, this guy is monitoring the consumption, so he has like 16 circuits and he knows what's going on. And it's like also their behavior, it's kind of changing and they're kind of like surprised in a good or in a bad way for what's going on in the house. So they're really actively engaging. While the other ones have like a 6K PV system, and when they had a shortage in energy, they were not even sure if the system was feeding the house because nothing was running. So I thought that was kind of like interesting kind of comparison. So in my opinion, in one way, really we saw a retrofit and the house became really a learning tool. And in the other one, it's more like showing that you went green, but you're not really embracing it. I'm just saying it's right or wrong, but it's very different attitudes. So just to close it out, what I really came out with as problems, that things that could be tackled from this like sort of supply side or things that could be offered better. Like we know there is a lack of knowledge, and so maybe more educational tools can be helpful, or quality and coordination are problems, and so maybe if we can offer professionals that like work under the same umbrella and they're like qualified, maybe that's helpful too. And users' behavior is very important, and so maybe instead of having an audit that's just technological, instead of just doing a blow-door test, maybe we do a survey and really understand how people are using the house, really what are the rooms, what are the, in what ways they're really engaging with the house. That's probably a good idea too, to have a personalized intervention. Also, that documentation and bureaucracy is kind of painful, so the more like people can be helped by some professionals to kind of go through that, the better, so that's going to help them accessing that more often. And also, maybe there are ways to help people prioritize, and instead of having just one-shot retrofit, we can help people kind of plan on the long range, or maybe try to find different incentives that are not just economic, but of different nature.
So I'd like to start with a question. It's actually directed at both of you. It seems that both projects hit on a desire for customization that is not really something we need, even though there's energy is a sort of underlying pattern that most people are doing house changes based focusing on components in place, and similar in your research. And they both also began at home. And I think that's really interesting, the idea of the domestic realm as a place for innovation and sort of discovery through the process and through application of technology and materials. And so I'd like to know, especially the DIY method, and I think American homes, even though they do have problems as a typology of single-family homes, they are often a site for people who haven't been involved in construction or sort of material investigations. That's a place where they start to engage that. So I wonder if you two could talk either to each other or each one answer independently how you think that the house as like an independent realm, like your place, feeds into that.
Well, the open source model is an interesting one because it's a lot of people in their own kind of private spheres contributing to something that's much bigger than even institutions, right? And so in some ways, at least for what I'm doing and the kind of information that I'm sharing with others, it's that kind of scalar relationship, right? Where we have more tools, more methods to do things on our own, but also we can share things in new ways. So that's an interesting kind of scalar relationship. You know, I would love it if I could cook bioplastic somewhere at UT. It just so far hasn't happened, and so I think it's a resources and a facilities issue. I would also love to like not sleep with my work, which is also, you know, happens in these situations. So I think it's also it's a matter of necessity as well. Of course, in your case, it's very different because the domestic realm is also the content of the work. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that the idea though of like giving people some tools to make their own choices, to understand also what's better for them, it's really important. And I actually think maybe some applications for like things that people can be more interactive for people could be really helpful, or like creating a network for people to interact and also talk to each other, which is what the neighbor does pretty much. But I would say that's crucial for them also to understand what they need first and express that. So
Do you think it would, the home remodeling sort of community would be better served by taking cues from the application community, which is sort of an online presence, and there's a global network of information sharing, which is very different from sort of actual neighbors? Like I think the two examples were about community and the neighborhood, physical neighborhood more so than the community of sort of home culture.
I don't know. I think that sound like a customized solution would be very interesting. Like one thing that I don't like is really one size fits all, which is like this is what the market is offering, take it or leave it, which I don't think works for everyone. So yeah, maybe that's good.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Yeah.
I have a question for Igor about the, about the, you said that sometimes the bioplastic can get moldy if it's too thick or too easily treated. Is that treatment, have you found a way to treat it in an ecologically sensitive way, or is that its own
Yeah, I
ecological
mean, the
problem?
work is still completely edible, so I
Oh,
think
okay.
with some antibiotic on it. What we learned is that it really only gets moldy while it's curing, but once it's dry, actually the mold is inside the material, so it's actually not on the surface, which is kind of crazy. And the other thing is also that when you're casting it and letting it cure and releasing it differently, when you get enough air to circulate, then that also prevents the mold from happening. And then now there are new samples where with new additives like alum, you can actually, I mean, a lot of these recipes are actually, they're like high glue recipes from the 19th century. So, you know, you could actually, and my bioplastic isn't vegan, because it comes, you know, partially from animals. So there, I mean, that's a lot of stuff to figure out. Like, I think there are a lot of people that are interested in, you know, making customizable materials that you can grow and make and eat. And I think like waterproofing is an issue. Like everything in architecture comes down to moisture. You know, there's like a really interesting fashion designer that's making incredible textiles with like large scale kombucha. And it's like, so you can like grow. That's how it's like super interesting. It's a really beautiful material. It's like a little bit like leather. It's really hard to figure out how to waterproof it without making it toxic again. So those are the challenges.
Good question.
Yeah, I had a couple of comments actually. It was with respect to Kiara's work. It was interesting that you mentioned there was this, like proposing a long-term strategy. I'd be more interested in sort of seeing where the behavioral interventions fit within these sort of physical, costly interventions and how that could play into each other. And the second comment that I had was I see validity in I see some validity in Mark's comment regarding these sort of associations, external associations that could foster this retrofitting culture. There's some research going on in in the School of Public Affairs that they're investigating the sort of social networks that play a role in the diffusion of solar PV. They're finding that the more sort of associations that there are that sort of facilitate this conversation, the faster it penetrates into the market. So it's basically as simple as saying if the two neighbors next to you have a PV, then you're more likely to get it than some random person in the neighborhood. So I think having these sort of informal organizations might be a good model to.
For Kara, on your research, we probably do a lot of like remodeling is mainly like making more houses better insulated or stuff like that. But do you see a lot of solar integration to the homes, or is that kind of an expensive thing that no one wants to do?
There is solar, although not everyone does it because generally, honestly, that's not a priority for everyone. Like most important and cost-effective things are like adding insulation, like new systems, HVAC, ducts, and so ceilings. So those are like the things that generally are most cost-effective. Consider that it may cost around $20,000, and even with the incentives, it's kind of expensive intervention. But like the project that I show you on the right, wanted to go solar because they wanted to become net zero. They're actually net plus. So they sell it back. The other one did it because they thought it was the right thing to do. They have bigger system, they don't even use it, it's less people. So it was just because now they got PV. So I mean, yes, there is solar, but it's not always like a priority because I think there are other things that could be more cost effective when people don't have the budget for solar.
Yeah. I may be a little bit rusty on the dates, but I feel like 2 years ago or so, this is for Kiara, I feel like the city of Austin passed some kind of regulation where before a homeowner can sell their property, they have to undergo an energy audit and make that information available to potential buyers. My husband and I put insulation in our house, and one of the reasons I did was because we knew we were going to have to sell this old drafty house. And, having this certificate that says that for the next 7-10 years that we don't have to undergo the installation or undergo the audit. That was one of the reasons that we did it. Just wondering if you've seen anything in your research that kind of talks about it before and after with that policy change and how it's affected the population and decision making.
That policy is effective for some of the buildings. They have to be like over like a certain age. So there is like a time frame whether like some of them are not required to do it. But it's definitely done with the purpose of people kind of having energetic portfolios. So when they're selling it, they want to sell a better product. These people pretty much did it because they just wanted to have a better house, a healthier place, and spend less. So the ones I interviewed, I didn't talk to people who did it, but I've been reading about it, and yeah, that's a strategy that's in place in Austin, but not everyone is forced to do it. So there's depending on like the construction time, like not every resident, like homeowner is supposed to do it, but that's a strategy that City of Austin is using, absolutely. But none of them was like made a comment on that as far as the interview went.
I think maybe just time for one more question.
I have a question first. So I think that there is a very strong economic in research. So what I can see kind of like the similar patterns between the retrofitting, which is kind of emerging market, to the like very like old traditional but like home building in general. So like the first like people start to build a home by yourself and then start to be like specialized and then just like that. Corporation contractors, general contractors. So these corporations see or think that kind of trend like to make the green energy retrofitting kind of more like specialized like contracting type of package, or you think that is more suitable to retain the kind of DIY approach that kind of people may want to retrofit the house by themselves?
I mean,
remain very economic, like
I think if like the like this industry is very specialized, and it has to be, because there's a lot of different things that needs to be done, and like it's important to be specialized, but I think it would be better off on the market, on the economy, having a bigger scale, which is why it's in a way it's fragmented and it's kind of fragile more than other industries related to housing. But I also think like the do-it-yourself, it's an important tool, because people will kind of understand how the house works. So, and I mean, I was reading statistics, and there is like less and less people kind of engaging with that. But definitely it's, I think it's a valuable tool. It's like when you install a new technology, and then the person knows how to use the smart metering, and then whatever other thing checks on the system, so like people know how that works, and I think that's an important component. But definitely the industry would probably be better off if it could scale up. So that's why I think it's interesting to kind of see, there are not many big companies for remodeling really, and like versus having like home builders that are really huge. So it would be more like healthy probably kind of business if they had a bigger scale, but with a lot of specialized workers. Because the problem is also losing a little bit of specialization, because it's getting harder and harder to find specialized workers, which is what the contractors say. All right.